Brandon Lewis.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I fully support the comments made by the Secretary of State earlier on today when he referred to this whole debacle as a horror story. And actually, what I thought was interesting is listening to members on the other side, particularly the Right Honourable Lady in her address. It was almost the comparative of the horror story described by the Secretary of State with this romantic story of what has happened with Unitary up until the new coalition government. And I have to say, looking back at what's happened, it almost seems like a farce to myself. Over the entire period of this, going back to 2006, this has been more than just, and I'm going to focus particularly on Norfolk, a question of Norwich having this fantastic offer that everybody wanted, and this new coalition government has been the first group to stand in the way of it. The reality is, in all that time, I've never had anybody, not a single resident, surprisingly enough, and I've knocked on doors in Great Yarmouth or Norwich itself as well, when I was there with the now honourable friend for Norwich South, ever say, please, will you give us a unitary authority? Will you please have local government reorganisation in Norfolk? In fact, there was huge frustration because this wasn't just about whether we would have a Norwich unitary. This started back in 2006 with people looking at all different options, and the confusion this created for Norfolk, where there was people looking at whether Great Yarmouth, my constituency, should be linking with Waveney and creating Yartoft, an east and west divide in Norfolk, or a four unitary option. There was a complete chaos. And the finance of this simply never did add up. And that's what really concerned me from the beginning. Apart from this clunking top-down approach, if this is going to happen, there will be unitary, which was the very clear message that authorities were being given. It was the expense. One chief executive in Norfolk actually said to me that their estimate, and this was in about 2008, was that their senior officers were spending around 40% of their time talking to other officers and other authorities about plans for unitary, of all the various different plans. Well, if we look at just how many senior officers that is across Norfolk, if they're spending anywhere near that amount that that chief executive was spending, the officer time and money put in, that's not in these figures, money that's already wasted and spent looking at plans and organisation rather than delivering frontline services over those last 3 or 4 years, I dread to think what that actually comes to, let alone the financial chaos, no doubt, that will now be delivered upon the people of Norwich. You've got to pick up the tab for Norwich City Council's amazing decision to spend something like, I think it was about £90,000 when they advertised for an implementation officer before they even got the go-ahead for this, and then set up an implementation group, which I was horrified to find when I was on a BBC show with the leader of Norwich City Council. It came out that the leader was getting an allowance of something like £12,000 to £15,000, I think they said, extra on top of his leader's allowance to chair an implementation group. I don't know what the other members of that group were getting and how much that was costing. It just seems to me an amazing amount of money has already been wasted. And to actually say that this would have been a good decision based on the savings of 6.5 from 2015 onwards, to me sums up the problems that we now have. It's the previous government looking at the current figures of an implementation cost, which are the figures the previous speaker already referred to, that show about £40 million of current implementation costs. The savings start, if they're delivered, in 2015-16. Well, we all know that the previous government spent a lot of time spending money now in the hope that it would come later, and we've seen the economic mess that that's got us into and the deficit that we're now having to deal with, and local government particularly is having to deal with because of this kind of mess that the old government left us with, and we now have to pick up the pieces of that economically. And I think it's a really clear sign of what the Labour Party thinks of Norfolk, that they seem to only want to focus on Norwich. The reality is, as my honourable friend, the member for Brawley, has rightly said, that a decision made for Norwich has an impact on the whole of Norfolk. And the whole of Norfolk had a view on this. It was asked about this. And as I said to the honourable member for Southampton Test, 85% wanted status quo, 10% wanted a county Norfolk, only 3% wanted Norwich. So clearly on the streets, in my experience, I have to say, the people didn't want it. When the Boundary Commission referred back to it, they didn't want a Norwich unitary. The House of Lords had concerns about it, the Permanent Secretary had concerns about it, and yet the Secretary of State at the time, the Labour government at the time, went ahead with it anyway. That seems to me as a clear example of ignoring local views. And in Norfolk, the view that the Labour Party have of Norfolk and focusing and saying the only thing that matters in Norwich is a clear example of why there are probably no Labour members left in Norfolk. And I think members, constituents and businesses of mine in Great Yarmouth who have got the opportunity of economic growth through the measures that have come in through the budget with the Outer Harbour, renewable energies, and I'm sure businesses right across Norfolk, places like Hethel, which is not in Norwich, and places like King's Lynn, will take the view that they have a great economic offer to make to Norfolk. So it does seem from the beginning to the end that this has been a hugely costly exercise already, and it would be interesting to know just how much money in Norfolk local government has already lost in spending time researching this. And to focus it on Norwich, where we've got a local authority that, apart from the money it was already wasted on implementation committees and officers, has made some very dubious and questionable decisions recently over its services with Connaught, over the Greyhound opening with housing as well. It doesn't seem to me to be a fit authority, to be one that's used as an example of what could be a perfect unitary. In fact, it seems the antithesis of just that. The best thing that can happen to Norfolk is that this sorry saga, this horror tale of horror tales, is put to an end once and for all, and I fully support this bill.
Sugar.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker.